Okay, so I just want to give you a few options for modelling things that might be made from triangles in Revit, because normally I would say if you have lots of faceted triangular shapes that you might be trying to create for a design like you can see here for Story Hall in Melbourne by MIT, by ARM, triangles should be an easy thing in most modelling programs. But in Revit, it can be an issue, particularly if you try to do what I'd normally recommend and make a family for that. So, did you want to talk to me? Yeah, okay, sure. Okay, so again, the way you should be thinking, if you've got repeated objects, even if they're different size and have different materials, it's a really good idea to make a family for those things. And I'd always encourage that. But in this case, it's not going to help you much. So a better option, maybe at first, is to just use model in place, and then I'll use generic models for the category. And okay, so to make a triangle panel on the ground, I'll make an extrusion and just draw my little triangle, whatever shape. Let's try and make it. Yep, it's fine. And then I'll set the depth over here to say 50. Go to a 3D view and we've got a little triangular panel. So the problem then is if I want to rotate that into a different plane, you can do it in a 3D view, but it's easier if you go to an elevation or a section. So I'll go back to the ground floor plan just so that you can see where my views are. I've got the east and west elevation to the left and right. So I'll go and open up, I'll go to east. So I'm viewing the triangle from the side, and if I select it and then go to rotate, I'll move the base point onto the edge of that triangle, and then you can see there my baseline still comes from the base point, and I can snap to the base of the triangle and then bring it around and rotate it. So that's fine, but I'll just show you some of the other issues. If I try to move it, so it's weird to let me rotate off the plane, but if I go and move it, so I try and move it up, it's locked. And that's simply because it's still associated with the plane it was drawn in. And that's the main issue with families and other things when you start getting into using loadable families for this. It's all to do with the planes. So here, if you click on this button that comes out, when you select it, the little diamond button, it's meant to disappear when you click on it. But since about 2016, it stopped disappearing. But if you deselect it and then select it again, you'll see it has disappeared. It's just one of those things. So now I can lift it off the plane. Right, so then you can freely rotate it still, of course, as well. And then it's not too bad. So if you go then to a 3D view, a good way of then propagating that is to try things like mirror. So if I use mirror pick axis, I can pick this edge and get another instance of it, and then I can go to edit extrusion and change it into a different triangle. And just keep going from there. So again, mirror pick axis, and just keep modelling away. So that approach works pretty well, but it only really works with model in place. If you try to do that with a loadable family, well, you could do it all in one family, that would work as well. But the problem I've seen is when people try and just have a triangular panel in a family and then load that, to rotate it away from the work plane is, it's possible. I've made it work, but it's not a simple thing. I won't even explain to you how to do it because it's pretty hard. So you have to really understand hosting, and also you'd probably want some nested families and some controller families, and it's not worth going into. So anyhow, that's an option though. If you want to model triangular panels, model in place should give you lots of options there. And and then you can just keep going and hopefully get something as interesting as this. And if you're interested in making pyramid type shapes, the process is a little bit different, but I'm just going to show you. I did a video on this last year, and this is done with families. which makes it a bit easier to control if you've got lots of repeated type pyramid shapes. And it is, I was going to say, here we go. So Revit Retail 2019-17, modelling a pyramid frame. Okay, so I'll show you what it looks like at the end. Okay, so there are, a couple of them. And, right, so that's, again, done with a family, and it's parametric, so you can change the height and the width and everything else. So that's a different option, though. Again, for that, it would be good to use a separate family file, or in other words, a loadable family. Yes, so anyway, a couple of different approaches. And so that should hopefully get you more familiar with the choices you've got between model in place or using loadable family. Again, in other words, saving it as an RFA file. Notice you can't just save a project as an RFA. You have to make a new family using one of the templates. So, so here, metric generic model is the template I chose, if you couldn't see that. And now I can go save as family. And I'll just save it. I just want to show you why I've hopefully gone through all of this, make it a bit clearer. There's our spatial modeling folder. So I've got so many subjects. There we are. Okay, so I'm just going to call this test triangle. And if you notice how the type selector hangs around a bit, so annoying. This thing, it's not even an option to, if I just bring this in so you can see it, so I can't even use the type selector, but annoyingly it just hangs around that little message sometimes. So if you have that happening, just realise that even if the type selector's not available, the type selector is this part at the top of the properties palette, you just have to hover over it to make it go away. Anyhow, so yeah, so I'm just going to do the same thing here, just to make it a little bit clearer why I went through all of that. So I've made my triangle in a separate family file, an RFA file, right, similar to what I did with model in place in the project file. Now I'll load that into my project and put it next to my other triangles. Just move it down a bit so I can see it, and then if I go to my east elevation, just like I did before, there's the triangle on the ground, and I'll go to try and rotate it. Knowing my luck it'll work. No, there we are. And this is what will drive you crazy if you're doing a lot of modelling in different planes. Yeah, it doesn't want you to rotate it away from the work plane. And there are ways of making it work, but I'm not going to show you, it's fairly involved. And to do it properly, again, even if you use all the options that you need to use to really get it to work, you need to actually have multiple families. Well, that's what I found anyway, and I set up a family for each different axis of rotation and nest them. It's a really fiddly process. And I think the reason they haven't made it easier is because most people who want to do complex geometry similar to this would go to another option, and use massing and assemblies, which is another modelling process in Revit, which I'll show you next. But anyhow, I just want to give you a basic rundown on those little differences between using model in place or a loadable family. Normally loadable families are the better option. Maybe I'll just see if you know why. Why would it be better normally to have this triangle thing loaded from a family file rather than modelling it in the project with model in place? What's the advantage of having a family file that controls that panel or that object? Absolutely, yeah, you can definitely. You can move from one project to another really easily and use your library parts in different projects. Absolutely, yeah. And then what about the management? Let's say you decide later that you want to have, you want to change the material or you want to change the thickness of this panel. Right? If it's a loaded family, then you can change that family, that one family file, essentially, and it'll change all of the instances of that panel in your project. And that's why Revit is set up the way it is, with families capable of being loaded from another file. And that's why it's not good to use model in place most of the time for things that can be loaded from other files. So let's say you've got 1,000 windows in your project. If it was SketchUp and you've modelled them, I know you can do groups and things in SketchUp, but let's say you've modelled them, or even in 3ds Max, and they're just dumb objects, they don't know what they are. To go and change the materials of those things can be a lot of work, and to change the size definitely is a huge amount of work because you've got to go and manually change each one. Even if they're grouped, it's still a bit of work. But with Revit, it's much easier to manage large groups of objects because, again, you can control them as a separate family. And so, yeah, I'll keep mentioning that. I think I've described some of the issues with model in place like that before. So when you get, the classic one is when you get lots of slats, which everyone wants to do these days because they're a great thing, and I use them all to a lot of my own designs. You might have thousands of timber slats in a project as parts of screens. If you've done each of those with model in place, and then you have to go and select each one and edit each one individually just to change the material, of course that's a ridiculous amount of work, when it can be done with a family, and then it's one click to change the material for all 1,000 slats.